Yeah, so probably likely no Super Mario World 3 and 4chan New Vegas tonight. Yeah, probably none of that tonight. Wait, I just clicked from the beginning? Load? I'm not replaying the entire visual novel. I mean, yeah, I could always just watch, well, not just my own, like, playthrough of Grisaia up to this point, but anyone else's. I don't think I need to, like, go through the entirety of Fruit of Grisaia again, so gonna just go back to where we last left off. I mean, it took me almost 3 years to get here, so that's a no-brainer. So every time the text looks like this on the screen, it's like a character's backstory, so I'm guessing this is obviously Yumiko's backstory. The summer sun scorched the ground beneath our feet. In the heart of the ancient capital, we walked uphill. Following the road away from the station's eastern exits, I was talking casually of trivial things. Yeah, it definitely sounds like she was younger in this. Well, of course she'd be younger in this flashback. Well, no shit. Looking up at the person holding my hand, I smiled. That's nice. Yeah, I wouldn't be sure what else to say, to be honest. It's just some dog in some window. It was probably cute, though. I guess. In contrast to my cheerful chattering, the woman had a clouded expression on her face. Her profile was beautiful but cold, almost like that of a marble statue. That's nice. The same words repeated in the same tone as if she was playing back a recording. Not understanding what that signified, I continued to speak. After that, that trivial little event must have made me very happy because I just kept on talking about the dog. Sentence flowed into sentence with barely a pause for a breath in between. Matching the rhythm of my skipping steps, I pattered on faster and faster, filled with innocent excitement. First her feet came to a stop and then my mom finally answered. Do you think you could be quiet for a while? I've honestly lost count as to how many times I've heard these cicadas throughout the entirety of Grisaia. Yeah, these have showed up like a lot. I've lost count throughout like all 5 main routes. So Yumiko's mom would just really prefer that she'd be quiet. 2 pleasures, the skipping of the conversation abruptly taken from me. I hesitated uncertainly, not sure where to direct my gaze. I don't think I'm supposed to be having fun here, but I just can't help but think about, like, the guy at GDQ being told to be quiet in front of 50,000 people. Even worse still, that happened on his birthday. He was trying to quote-unquote liven up the mood. It was just being more annoying than anything else, and just eventually resulted in him being told by the person actually doing a speedrun, just basically, like, you can't just tell him to outright shut up in front of, like, a live audience of 50,000 people, so he just told him he'd prefer if he'd be quiet. Yeah, like, basically the whole dynamic between Caveman, DCJ, and Chibi was just solid gold. I'm sorry, Mom. How many times have I spoken those words by then? I'm sorry. Even when I'd done nothing wrong, even when I'd done nothing at all. Those words offered an exit from any uncomfortable moment, and above all else, they lightened the burn on my mother's heart. Mumbling those words has always been the best that I could do at times like those. That's alright, sorry, Yumiko. And my mother in turn offered me the same soft words of apology. In retrospect, it might very well have been her fault that I developed the habit of saying I'm sorry, relying on the words. Let's be on our way. A cold profile, a rigid face locked in position, never turning to me. Speaking a few words with nothing but a slight movement of her lips, my mother began to walk once more, her strides even smaller than usual. With a nod, I stepped forward at my mother's side, slipping halfway under the shadow cast by her parasol. As the shades swayed with her steps, the blazing sun flickered before my eyes like a movie shot on cheap film. We walked in silence through the midsummer heat, surrounded by the voices of cicadas. I squeezed my mother's hand tightly, very tightly, as if that connection was the only thing in the world I could rely on. My mother, Misako, was born to the Kawamoto family, owners of a real estate business in the ancient city of Kamakura. I'm gonna see if my stream is... Yeah, it's public, alright. I figured I'd just double check. After graduating from university, she accepted an arranged marriage to my father, Sakaki Michiaki. She was 25 years old. The Kawamoto were small-time landowners, and their business had fallen into financial problems when their only daughter married the young president of East Beach Railways. Kawamoto family treated as a miracle comparable to winning the lottery. And had taken complete control of the regional railroad network. Welcome home. Right. About dinner? Why do you always feel the need to ask? What about my change of clothes? Yes, have I prepared? Then bring them down immediately. I'll be leaving in 30 minutes, so take the clothes to Kojima at the entrance. Yes. Dad? My father was a complete workaholic with more than one house to return to. He only came to see us once a week and never stayed longer than an hour. At that point, I haven't held a conversation with him. All I can remember were brief moments of eye contact when we passed each other by. I can still remember the way he looked at me. There was no emotion in his gaze, not even contempt. Almost as if he didn't even realize something was there. His eyes were frighteningly empty. My room in that house was pointlessly large. Spacious as it was, it hadn't been made for a child to live in. The bed and closet were both adult-sized. For the most part, it looked nothing more like just another guest room. A child's desk haphazardly purchased assortment of stuffed animals and toys. These were the only objects that suggested otherwise, and they felt deeply out of place. What kind of greeting would make Dad talk to me? I stood in front of my mirror, practicing my many different facial expressions, earnestly thinking over a problem with no solution. What kind of smile would make him come home more? Alone in a room far too large for me, I thought about the stone-faced father I barely knew. How could I catch his attention? How could I make him realize I was even there? Am I doing it wrong? I can't really tell. Good morning, good morning. Good morning! Within that staid and conservative railroad family, a daughter bore little weight. My mother's marriage had seemed a blessing for the Kawamoto family, but when she gave birth to me, it quickly became an uncomfortable topic. Her job had been to give birth to an heir to inherit the East Beach Empire. Instead, she produced a daughter, at best a potential tool for political marriage. No one was to blame for that, but it was still a deep disappointment of those around her. My father had treated his new wife very kindly at first. But after I came into the world and they learned that my mother was too physically frail to endure many pregnancies, he became noticeably brusque and distant. That transformation must have hurt my mother deeply. After it began, she grew gradually weaker in body and spirit until finally she could no longer manage to take care of father's personal needs. My mother returned to her parents when I was 6 years old. She had endured as best she could, desperate not to leave a bad impression on my father's family. But my mother was a fundamentally sheltered and fragile woman. Putting aside her physical condition, her mind had been worn down to the point where she could simply no longer cope. And so, one hot midsummer day, she gathered our luggage, took my hand, and left the Sakaki house. I returned. Yeah, welcome home. Welcome back. It wasn't a joyous homecoming for anyone involved. After an exchange of indescribably uncomfortable greetings, it began an equally awkward conversation. I'm alright, it's nothing serious. Let's make sure you recover quickly, dear. For Michiaki-san's sake as well as yours. It was obvious at a glance that my mother couldn't possibly go back anytime soon. Still, my pragmatic grandparents wanted their daughter back with the Sakaki family before the wound of separation grew too deep. My mother may have wanted to return herself, even knowing she was no longer capable of enduring that life. There was a slight edge of frustration in her voice as she vaguely affirmed my grandparents' words. They left me out of the conversation so completely I began to feel invisible. In the end, I couldn't help but call out. When I spoke, my mother's hand twitched around mine as if only just realizing she'd been pulling me along at her side. As if she'd been trying to forget an unpleasant reality by averting her eyes from it. Say hello to your grandma and grandpa. Still not looking in my direction, my mother muttered those words quietly. I tried out the greeting I practiced for Dad and my grandparents. Yes. Hello there. Hello. Their responses were stiff and awkward. They didn't so much as smile at me. It had already been decided my mother would be hospitalized. Originally, the doctors had recommended admitting her to a psychiatric ward. But a return home under the cloud of a separation would no doubt become the subject of gossip in the area. Who knew what people would say about a mental illness on top of it all? Instead, Mom returned home under the superficial cover of poor health and entered the general hospital. My grandparents had been busy enough with their struggling business. Now they had new burdens on their hands and made no attempt to hide their exhaustion. The complaint began the very first day. If Misako hadn't given birth to a girl, this would never have happened. Don't talk like that. Come now, you said it yourself, dear. We had a wonderful opportunity here, but now it's gone to waste. Maybe I did, but... This is why she should have tried again the moment they knew it was a girl, even if it meant shouting down those doctors. You know as well as I do, Misako's not strong enough for that now. But... During the years I spent living with my mother's family, my grandparents never showed me anything like affection. In retrospect, I was an unwanted burden, a symbol of failure. I suppose they hardly had any reason to welcome me, but even so, it was a form of cruelty. And now I had to send Yumiko to school as well? Just what are we supposed to do? The Sakaki family's paying for her living expenses, aren't they? It's fine. Certainly not fine. The company's been hanging on his fingernails for months, if you hadn't noticed. How can it be so easygoing about this? Do you have to put it like that? The two of them seemed to quarrel virtually every minute of every day right until I left the house. They were considerate enough not to behave this way around my mother, but their unwanted grandchild was a different story. Raw emotions flew back and forth if I wasn't even there. When I was inside the house, I couldn't help hearing unpleasant conversations. It was a small mercy we had one of the spacious gardens so typical in country towns. I'd always slip out there when I saw my grandparents talking with serious expressions on their faces. I passed the time scratching on the ground with tree branches. Those scribbles in the dirt became an escape, a portal to a vague, faraway world. I wonder when we can go home again. Recalling what I'd seen through the window that day, I moved the point of my tree branch to the soil. Recalling my few happy memories, I threw them out one by one, over and over, hoping to make them even slightly more vivid in my mind. My drawing improved quickly in pursuit of a clear and unmistakable exit from reality. I carefully combed my shoulder-length hair and tied it back with a rubber band. Hadn't particularly been trying to grow it out, but once I understood haircuts cost money, I simply allowed things to take their course. Not to imply my grandparents were keeping me in rags, they were far too vain for that. I always had the minimum necessary to look respectable. But ever since I'd grown old enough to understand my position, it was difficult to muster the slightest interest in fashion. I opted for plain, dark clothes, the more inconspicuous the better. My hair fell straight to the shoulder in the simplest possible style. As a child, I wanted nothing more than to be noticed, but at some point, I began to seek refuge in my own anonymity. It seemed safer to be ignored. I'm off. Then walked off alone. I'd grown tall. I was wearing a middle school uniform now. Nobody had commented on either fact. Ever since arriving at that place, I'd been alone. There were always people in the house, but I was alone. Hello there, Miss Yumiko. Here's your lunch for today. Thank you, Toshi-san. Toshi-san was an old woman who looked after my grandparents' family for many years as their housekeeper. Even when the business fell in hard times and could no longer afford the expense, she stayed in the house next door, taking care of us without compensation. I wasn't her employer, but she always called me Miss in a kindly tone of voice. She was the only person in my life who showed me real affection. What are you saying? It looks wonderful on you, miss. Thank you, Toshi-san. You're the only one who tells me that sort of thing. Thank you again, I better get going. I didn't talk with anyone in my middle school. Or rather, I couldn't. It was an insular place where relationships had long since been firmly established, often mirroring the connections between parents. Someone abruptly wedged in from the outside had very little hope of fitting in. Much less for a quiet girl who moved out to the country under circumstances like mine. None of the other children were friendly to me. I knew they talked about me behind my back. But after the years I spent alone with my grandparents, I suppose I'd grown used to such casual disdain. My student life didn't feel particularly painful, it was merely empty. I filled the vast stretches of empty time by drawing pictures. It was a habit I picked up as a means of escaping into fantasy, but as I came to accept reality, the images changed gradually into simple landscapes. Not to say I was viewing things more positively now, I've simply grown numb. The contents of my drawings mattered less to me than the time I could kill moving pencil over paper. I no longer looked for meaning in the art itself. My grandfather had a pile of empty sketchbooks abandoned from the days he had time to pursue his hobbies. Made rare requests and took them as my own, and then, yeah, drawing landscapes. When school ended, I would make my way over to the hospital where my mother was staying. The hospital was further from my grandparents' house than my middle school. To reach that, to walk a good 2 kilometers, first descending a slope and then climbing back up. I didn't have a bicycle, and asking for bus fare would have been unpleasant, so I always traveled out on foot. Of course it wasn't pleasant, but I developed an obstinate streak in my own right. That hike had become a part of my daily routine. A familiar nurse called out to me as I walked down a familiar hallway. Good afternoon. Your mother seems to be feeling better today. She even cleaned her plate at lunch for once. That's nice to hear. Sure, it's because you're coming to see her every day, dear. Very sweet of you. Well, I don't know. My mother's condition was always seesawing from improvement to setback. It wasn't the sort of disease you could be cured with some wonder drug. And in Mother's case, the doctors didn't entirely understand the causes of her illness, or even the reasons she wasn't healing. There was no clear path to a complete recovery. By that point, I understood my existence had a great deal to do with her sickness. My visits couldn't possibly have been helping her. It was probably just the opposite. I walked rapidly towards room 301 in the A ward. There was a part of me that thought those visits were pointless, but that without them, I would have lost the only thing I had left, my origins. Even as I isolated myself behind an inconspicuous appearance, in that one place I desperately sought some kind of connection. Mom? My mother had been given a private room. The hospital's administrator was an old acquaintance of my grandfather, so it had been arranged at a considerable discount. Or so our gossipy neighbors believed. It was a pure white room, largely empty except for the plain medical bed standing by the window. My mother passed her days lying there. There was no medical reason she couldn't go out, but she never tried. My grandmother greeted me with the most convincing smile she could force onto her face. But that face didn't turn towards me. The nurse told me you were feeling better today. Her physician had asked me to fill the visits with conversation. Even the silliest little things will do. Just keep talking to her, please. But I filled every moment with silly chat for a different reason entirely. So today, the conversation was almost entirely one-sided. My mother's responses were mostly monosyllabic. It was difficult to tell if she was even listening. Even so, I continued to chatter away. Nice weather again, isn't it? Eventually, I ran out of things to talk about and changed the topic to weather out of desperation. Time flowed by in silence. 1 minute of stillness. 3, 5. Finally, my mother slowly opened her mouth to speak. Even before the words came, my body twitched in alarm. I'm sorry. I really am. For being such a useless mother. That's not... When my mother spoke to me, it was always to deliver an apology. That's why I babbled away so persistently. I didn't want to give her the chance to speak. I gotta be getting back now, okay? I see. Folding the chair with a few practice movements, I leaned it against a small shelf on the wall. Bye, Mom. I'll see you tomorrow. I came to this place in search of connection, and every day I went home with nothing but disappointment. To be honest, those visits were painful for me. Sometimes I thought about how much nicer it would be to just stop coming entirely. But without my faint connection with my mother, I would be adrift in a sea of nothingness. I had no choice but to hold stubbornly to that single lifeline. I wasn't under any illusion my conversations would do her any good. In fact, her physician had begun to indirectly allude otherwise. Sometimes along the lines of, you don't have to come every single day, dear. But I was afraid. What if my mother did recover? If I abandoned her now, she might not take me with her when she returned to her old home. I didn't have many pleasant memories of that place, but at least there was something other than an object of scorn. At least there I had something like an identity, and I couldn't return it unless my mother took me with her. Pushing everything that had brought us out there in my mind, I clung stubbornly to the childish hope of a happy ending waiting around the next corner. The first year of my middle school life flowed by aimlessly. The only thing I gained at that time was a bit of textbook knowledge. Apart from that, I hadn't learned a thing. I'm fairly sure my grades were good. I didn't want to give anyone the chance to criticize me on that front. Becoming a difficult child would be too risky. My place in the world was tenuous enough as it was. Thinking back on it now, I might have been happier just running away. Having spent my entire life shut up inside a box, the idea of trying to escape didn't even occur to me. Just as 1 year ago, I said goodbye to no one in particular and left the house alone. Nothing had changed. The scenery was the same. My life was the same. Everything in that country town was static. Please don't resent the master and missus. They were originally very kind people, you know. Dragos were mainly my grandparents who had been living together for many years now, and they still only spoke when it was absolutely necessary. Every moment I spent in that house made me feel as if I was slowly suffocating. But Grandpa and Grandma act like I'm not even there. When you become poor, the heart grows impoverished as well. They're too tense and busy to give you the attention you deserve, dear. Once the business recovers, I'm sure that'll change. I'm not so sure about that. You're a very sweet girl, Miss Yumiko. I'm sure they'll realize that someday. Until then, please try to make do with your decrepit old neighbor. That's not funny. You're always looking after me. Nothing about our household had changed in years. As always, our lifestyle was dependent on Toshi-san's quiet assistance. She took care of all of us without a single complaint. But I hadn't seen my grandparents show her gratitude for everything she did. Not even once. Toshi-san's son, who lived with his wife in the neighborhood, clearly wanted to pry his mother away from her unrewarded service to the Kawamoto family. I've overheard them having a heated fight on the topic. Our life was the same as always been, but beneath the surface it was slowly coming apart. One day I was making my way along a sloping road I had once walked with my mother, bombarded by the cries of cicadas. The area around my grandparents' home was a district with strict regulations on a heightened variety of buildings, so the scenery hadn't changed much in the years since my mother entered the hospital. It was picturesque in a way that seemed to appeal to rich people. Many city dwellers had their second houses nearby, but I could never come to enjoy the scenery. It left me cold. The things that mattered to me changed for the worse. But the things I hated, the things that left me cold, never seemed to go away. Driven by frustrating, indistinct feelings of powerlessness, I began to walk faster. But with a flinch of surprise, my leg suddenly came to a halt. Morning, Yumiko-chan. On your way to school? No need to stop walking, just wondering if you mind having a little chat. After that moment of hesitation, my legs began to move once more, faster than before. Striding along almost like a race walker, I hurried down the road leading to school. Seems like your dad's been getting up to a few things lately. There's been a bit of a commotion, actually. Do you know anybody by the name of Ninomiya-san? She's a woman just about your mother's age. Remember anything about her? Seriously, anything's fine. I'd really appreciate it. This is more about your family, back when your mom and dad were living together. Do you remember having a helmet by the name of Mr.? What's up, Yumiko-chan? As I've told you before, I don't have anything to say, and I'm not gonna answer your questions. Please stop following me around like this. Look, Yumiko-chan, I wasn't. And while you're at it, stop calling me that. I don't recall being your friend. Excuse me. Sheesh, must get that from her father. There was one significant change in my stagnant life. A reporter from a gossip magazine whose job seemed to consist of digging for information on my father was making a habit of loitering around me. I first met him during the winter of my first year in junior high. At the time, I was still comically naive. He approached with kind words and sympathy, two things I wasn't used to getting, and convinced me to open up to him about my family's circumstances. Pathetic as it was, I didn't realize it was all for an article until the moment my grandmother threw the tabloid in my face. The tabloid? It's like a physical object, right? Piece of paper? And delivered a furious scolding. Humiliated and bitter, I swore to myself to never again discuss personal matters with strangers, or to trust their compassion. And despite it all, the very same journalist had the nerve to show his face in front of me again. Every time something happened, he'd come around sniffing for scraps of information. Speaking with him felt like bruising against a normally and particularly slimy leech. I marched ahead as quickly as I could, one fierce step after another, trying to shake off the lingering residue of our encounter. But then again, the place I was hurrying to wasn't exactly pleasant in its own right. So I saw Yamachi by the station, right? Around the roundabout? When I say hey, he just runs away. That guy never hangs out with us anymore. Guess he did get himself a girlfriend or whatever. Who's Yamachi going out with? You know, came out in Class C, it says. It would have been much easier if they simply treated me like it didn't exist. Their clumsy method of ignoring me could sometimes become a weapon as sharp as any insult. I was well past the point of letting each and every sudden silence weigh on my mind, but it still wasn't exactly a pleasant feeling. Look who showed up again. Her grades are pretty good, but her mom's in the hospital, right? Wonder if it runs in the family. The more I tried to ignore them, the more their whispers seemed to pierce their way into my ears. A year passed since I first set foot in school. By then, there wasn't a single person in my class who didn't know all about my family. There's no such thing as privacy in the countryside. The real nature of my mother's illness, which should have been kept absolutely confidential by the hospital, had filtered all the way down to middle schoolers' gossip. Purely academic question occurred to me. If this wasn't despair, then what exactly would qualify? No escape here either. I opened my sketchbook beneath my desk, making sure nobody could see. I kept up my art. And flipping through the book, it was obviously my ability to depict fine details that come a long way in the last year. But all that really proved was how obsessively I sought escape. How deeply detached I'd grown from the world around me. Rather than pride, I felt something like nausea. Even my art was beginning to lose its value as a refuge. The room was pure white. Nothing had changed here. Not the room, not even my mother's posture in her bed. It was as if I'd never left. Every time I walked in that door and saw her sitting there, I felt a surge of irrepressible pity run through me. Mom, I'm here. Yumiko, come in. As always, I saw my mother in profile. As always, her gaze didn't turn to me. As always, she smiled quietly. But there was no tenderness in that expression. She was simply moving her face into that shape. It was an empty imitation of a real smile. I brought your books. I lowered a small bundle of books and weekly magazines my mother requested on the shelf beside her bed. They usually came with the mail, but sometimes I happened to run to a nurse who would hand them over to me for more personal delivery. Of course, the weeklies in question were respectable, established publications that largely kept away from the scandals and rumors circulated by the tabloids. We couldn't take the risk of rereading something like that article I'd unwittingly contributed to the previous winter. It undoubtedly would have set back her treatment, which was already proceeding slowly enough. My mother's newfound reading habits need to be part of an attempt to learn more about my father and the company he was running. Mom never knew much about the business, so I would have been surprised if she could understand half of what she was reading. I see. I'll have Toshi-san make you a meal next time. Sure, that'll be a lot tastier than what they serve in the hospital. I see. Our interactions follow the same familiar pattern. I chatted away relentlessly, while my mother muttered vaguely. Lately, even those monosyllabic responses had grown repetitive and careless. Almost as if she was beginning to treat the world with the same careless disinterest my father had shown her. It was a particularly different visit. My mother barely spoke and I ran out of things to say fairly quickly. As the hours I spent at school had grown increasingly suffocating, I was spending more and more time wandering around in search of quiet places where I could be alone. These days, I frequently found myself lacking stories to tell. Guess she'd be going home. Little hope tomorrow will be better. Things I wanted to stay the same fell apart. The things I wanted to change stayed exactly as they were. Time no longer seemed to be flowing. It was a stagnant, brackish pool, and even treading water was becoming a struggle. As I prepared to leave, my mother spoke. That hadn't happened for quite some time. That one word came as a complete surprise. Was she about to say something? Thinking the matter over calmly, it was foolish to even imagine my mood suddenly changed. But I was so starved for a glimmer of hope, my mind latched onto the most optimistic possible interpretation. And then with a few simple words, my naive happy end scenario shattered like the fragile piece of glass it had always been. If only you'd been a boy. My mother had never said anything like that before. No doubt the thought had crossed her mind, but so long as she had even a shred of rationality remaining, words could have never passed her lips. After all, if she were to say that, Mom, then nothing could ever change, except to fall apart. Why couldn't you have been a boy? Something slipped out of my hands and clattered to the floor. A visitor from the company had dropped off a few jelly desserts. I've been taking one from the shelf with a spoon. My mother had been skipping her meals lately, but I thought she might at least manage to eat that. Considering the season, a white peach jelly seemed appropriate. Maybe it would be easier for her to hold a spoon with a flat handle. Moments before, those were the only thoughts in my mind. They were gone now. Obliterated by my mother's words so completely it was as if they never existed. I ran as fast as I could, pushing my heart so hard I thought it might just sputter to a stop. And down the slope in front of the hospital. Up again, onto a large, curving detour. Past the station, around the corner from a small cleaning store. Into the remains of an abandoned factory. Only then, absolutely confident I was alone, did I finally come to a halt. Gasping for air, I doubled over and held my trembling legs with both hands, propping up a body that seemed ready to collapse. My peripheral vision was dim and clouded, as though I was peering out from inside a tunnel. I could feel sweat pouring out from all over my body. My hair and clothes were completely disheveled. I fallen at some point on the way over. There were scrapes on my knee and elbow. I pushed myself erect, a tattered mess of a girl. But I couldn't have cared less about any of that. After all, the tears streaming uncontrollably down my face were far more blatantly pathetic than my beat-up clothing. What am I supposed to do about it? I could have endured it if she complained about something I could fix. I could have behaved better. There was still room for my grades to improve. I could have made myself more presentable. I could have cut every strand of hair to the exact same length. I could have learned to walk in a refined way at an absolutely steady pace. But no matter what, I was powerless to undo the reality of my own birth. Why'd she have to choose the one thing I could never ever change? My grandparents were right back then. If it was possible, she should have just tried again. She should have just crushed the egg in that womb and pretended it never happened. Better than this hopelessness. This irreparably broken life. Placing my hands against my breasts, I pushed down with all my strength. How could a thing so totally beyond my control bring me such misery? I felt a dull, throbbing pain deep inside my chest. The painful pressure was accompanied by a slight twinge of stimulation. Even as I rejected it, my body reminded me I was female. There was pain, but at the same time I could feel the blood throughout my body beginning to stir in an unfamiliar way. Instinctively, I knew it was something sexual, and I shivered with pure loathing. Okay, I wasn't expecting that line. I hated my body. I hated the woman it was becoming. I hate it. I can't take this. I didn't ask for that misery. I had no say in my crime. It was born with me. But so long as I lived, the pain would always be lurking somewhere deep inside me. If only you'd been a boy. With one phrase, anyone can reduce me to nothing. I could study all I wanted. I could be the sweetest, most well-behaved person in the world. But so long as I stayed in that body, my naked vulnerability would never go away. All that for what? I threw open my bag and took out my pencil box. Flipping open the lid, I retrieved the box cutter I used as a makeshift sharpener for my colored pencils. Wonder when exactly I began to find the act of cutting things apart pleasant. The clicking of the blade emerging from its sheath, the sound of something once whole being severed apart. Those have become calming sounds to me. How wonderful would it be if I could slice away my femininity with a single box cutter? I don't know how that works, but I can imagine how one would slice away their masculinity with a single box cutter, and trust me, it would hurt. I don't think that's quite I'm trying to imagine how that's possible. Like, they slice your tits off or something? How wonderful would it be if I could just sever my fate with the touch of a blade? How wonderful would it be if one movement of my hand cut me free of all the troubles that coiled around me and choked the air from my lungs? As I cut savagely through the long, identical bundles of black, such thoughts ran through my head one after another. On the boiling concrete, speckled with the remnants of faded paint, clumps of black gathered. They fell like a vile rain until the sun-heated ground was covered in them. I could feel the gloom in my heart fading as I looked down to the darkness. But in its place, that dirty blackness left a layer of filth inside me that can never be cleaned away. You got it all wrong, okay? Don't give me that. You always... Hey, hold on, look at that. Whoa, what the... The heck's with that hairstyle? She looked like a friggin' boy. Did she cut that herself? But seriously, why? Maybe they ran out of money over there again? I think they can afford even a friggin' haircut. Come on. I'd hope so. When I showed up for school with a hairstyle more appropriate for a boy, my classmates' reaction was exactly what I expected. They made no effort to hide their amusement. I'd gotten that far uneventfully, not giving them much to work with, so perhaps there's a bit of a recoil effect. Whatever the case, my rough bob cut became an easy target for mockery and speculation. Of course, there wasn't a single person there who showed any concern for me. My grandmother was simply lost for words at first. Not the aghast expression on her face she meant was she was worried about me. This will be the last time you behave in such an unbecoming manner. Do you understand me, young lady? The one and only thing she was concerned about was how poorly my actions would appear in the eyes of society. Honestly, utterly shameful. My grandmother, muttering about shame and humiliation, averted her eyes and disappeared inside the house. And for a very long time I sat alone in my room, utterly silent except for the voices of cicadas. What on earth happened to your hair? I'm sorry. You don't have anything to apologize for, miss. You poor thing. Toshi-san was the only person who showed genuine concern for me. Didn't make me feel any better to know I'd made the kind old woman worry. More than anything else, her sorrowful face made me regret my rashness. I got carried away by my emotions and lashed out, but nothing changed. Nothing was gonna change. For the sake of the one or two people who acknowledged my existence, I decided not to repeat my mistake. Toshi-san's death soon came thereafter. As the record-setting heatwave stretched on, the news was constantly occupied with stories of elderly people succumbing to heat stroke. And one day our neighbor, already past her 70th year, was among them. But can you please leave? Don't say that. Please, at least let me offer incense. Yumiko, you're aware of the reason my mother collapsed, aren't you? She worked day in and day out for the Kawamoto family without pay, without so much as a word of thanks. Do you have any thoughts on that? I think it was inexcusable. That's why. In that case, please stay out of our lives. We don't want anything to do with the Kawamoto family from now on. Let alone with all the strange rumors going around back home. Leave it at that. If you say so. Well, goodbye. I want to at least say thank you. Your world is supposed to grow larger as you grow up. Mine seemed only to be shrinking ever smaller. I had lost Toshi-san, and with her, the small place of refuge in front of our door vanished as well. Just as I was on the verge of giving up, finally, at long last, a small ray of light broke through the wall of dark clouds. Mom, you seem to be feeling well. My mother was eating a mandarin orange served as a treat after a meal. Her expression was as placid as always. For some reason, my body feels a little lighter today. But for once, it didn't look like a mask she plastered onto her face. The peace in her eyes seemed real, something that flowed naturally to the surface from deep inside her. After many years of peace, it seemed her mind was slowly beginning to regain its equilibrium. The recent downturn had given way to weeks of steady improvement. Once you can meet your own needs, it becomes possible to worry about the needs of others. My mother began to give my questions real responses for the first time in years. Doctor said all the signs are good. Apparently wanted to take as much medicine starting next week, and we'd never been able to discuss her treatment, but lately it had become a safe topic of conversation. Specifically, her progress was so promising, a discharge from the hospital was coming into view at long last. Next Monday, Grandma and I will be talking to the doctor, so I'll ask all about what happens next, and then... What is it? What is it? Yumiko, dear, I'm sorry I said something so terrible to you. You've been doing so much for me all this time, and I gave you some nonsense about you not being a boy. It's okay, Mom. Don't worry. Look, your hands are all messy from eating that orange. Have a tissue, I'll throw away the skin. Thank you. All you need to worry about is getting better. I gotta get going now, I'll come again tomorrow. Already, you don't have to rush. I'll be back tomorrow, okay? I stood up and waved goodbye with a quavery smile. My mother was still sitting in profile, but I could tell she was smiling in return. Holding that image in my mind, I slipped quietly out of the room. The moment I closed the door behind me, the world began to shimmer through a wall of tears. I couldn't remember the last time my mother had showed that kind of concern for me. I don't know if she ever had. By standard of a healthy parent-child relationship. I guess it was an insignificantly small thing, but for me at that moment, those tentative words of compassion were enough to inspire overwhelming happiness. Happiness so strong I couldn't help but break down and sob. She's getting better. She's really getting better. Perhaps though she's had taken pity on me and stopped by to heal my mother on her way to heaven, things are moving in such a positive direction, such thoughts seem plausible. Next week, my grandmother and I went to meet with Mom's physician for an update on her condition. Normally, I was the only one who attended those meetings, but the progress was significant enough he asked Grandma to come as well. Misako-san is without doubt improving rapidly. Not that I needed to hear any of it, I knew she was recovering. Does that mean my daughter's gonna be alright? Her treatment's progressing very smoothly. At this point, it's safe to begin preparing for her discharge and return. The moment those words left his mouth, my grandmother lowered her head so deeply I thought she might topple out of her chair and prostrate herself on the floor. Thank you. Thank you so much, Doctor. Please stop. You don't have to bow to me, ma'am. I can finally make everything up to Sakaki-san and his family. Thank you so much. As always, doing her best to pretend I wasn't even in the room. Mom's return to her husband would ensure the Kawamoto business would continue receiving support from the Sakaki family. It was blatantly obvious from my grandmother's words it was the sole reason for her gratitude. To the woman who brought her into the world, my mother was nothing but a defective political tool. But that only strengthened my determination to take care of her. Once the doctor's explanation was over, my grandmother went straight home without even stopping by to see her daughter's face. I heard her muttering the names of business partners to herself as she went. She was probably planning to hurry back to the house and inform them of the news. They decided to discharge you from the hospital next week. Then I suppose we won't have to trouble Grandpa and Grandma anymore. And of course you won't have to hike over here every day to check up on me like this. That'll be the greatest relief of all. I feel terrible at having been such a burden on you, Yumiko. My mother spoke those words with real remorse in her voice. But at that moment the burden didn't seem so heavy. My mother's feelings were more than enough compensation. Could you open the curtains for me, dear? Just as requested, I pulled back the curtains from the window at Mom's side. A vault of blue stretched out beyond the panes of glass. It was the very picture of a summer sky. Compared to the heart of the city where the Sakaki house stood, the blue in that place seemed far more pure and vivid. Nice weather again today. When I finally leave this place, I'd like to go up to the roof just once to watch the sky. Toshi-san told me once my mother had always enjoyed gazing at the sky. She didn't look for anything in particular, just tilted her head back and watched. And when people asked her why, she never find an answer. Memories from the day we first came to town flashed in my mind. We walked hand in hand under a beautiful blue sky, but Mother's dull, lifeless eyes never left the path below our feet. Finally remembered the sky. Could mean she was on her way to recovery. When they discharge you, let's look at the sky together. Let's do that. It occurred to me I didn't have a single memory of the two of us doing something like that together. I found myself very much looking forward to the small event that would accompany my mother's discharge from the hospital. Everything was moving in a positive direction. The stupidly optimistic scenario I sketched out in my imagination was coming closer and closer to reality. And let me guess, until it wasn't. My mother's recovery produced clear changes in my own emotions. I'd barely spoken to anyone in the weeks since Toshi-san's death, but I was slowly beginning to communicate with those around me. My grandparents still kept their distance, but if I approached them myself using my mother as a pretext, I could at least get them to have a conversation with me. Mom's recovery was their primary objective after all. They couldn't avoid hearing me if I brought it up. Watching my grandparents interact with me despite obvious reluctance, I felt as though I'd achieved a small but significant rebellion against the people who spent years ignoring my very existence. I'm right here, I'm in an important position. More than anything else, the sense of meaning gave me strength. In school, the others still rejected my very existence, but it didn't bother me much anymore. I would be returning to the Sakaki house once my mother recovered. This hollow school life would soon be over. No matter how much they laughed or rolled off me harmlessly. 3 days before my mother was scheduled to leave the hospital, I was hurrying to school through the rain. The drizzle that had begun a little after midnight was just picking up into a steady, heavy rain as I left the house. My umbrella wasn't enough to catch it all. Pausing for a moment, I glanced up at the angry sky beyond the edge of my umbrella. It was covered in deep black clouds from horizon to horizon without so much as a patch of clear sky in between. Mom must be feeling a little down. It was nice enough when the weather was clear, but staring up at a menacing sky like that might inspire a bit of gloominess, just as her feelings were finally starting to take an upward swing. With that thought, I began to walk again. Just as I reached the intersection between the road to school and the main street leading to the station, a familiar face appeared from around the corner. Been a while, Yumiko-chan. How you been? You again? That wasn't a face I was eager to see. I instantly recognized the tabloid reporter who had once wheeled me into becoming a source for an article that mixed fragments of truth with innuendo and lies. Standing under a large jet black umbrella that seemed to mirror the rain clouds above, he looked me over with a faint smile on his face. Well, you've gotten awfully cute since the last time I saw you. My god. Got those looks from your mom, or maybe your dad? His words seemed to have grown even greasier and more presumptuous than before. When I walked past him silently, the reporter fell easily in beside me, keeping pace as though I'd been invited them to follow. I had a little something to ask you when I was in the neighborhood, so I decided to drop by. Think we could talk in that coffee shop or something? I believe I already informed with you that I don't have anything whatsoever to discuss with you. Don't say that. We're talking about your father here, right? Sure, there's plenty of things for us to talk about. You're mistaken. I haven't even seen my father in many years. The Sakaki house was the invisible mass which we all orbited around. I knew my current lifestyle was possible only because of his financial support, but sometimes I couldn't help but feel a powerful burst of resentment towards the father I barely knew. In particular, when people carelessly assume we have a relationship of kind. The last time, I don't want to talk to you. Please stop following me around before any strange rumors get started. Stopping briefly, I spat out the clearest possible rejection, then quickly turned around to leave. I couldn't allow trouble of this sort to arise so soon before Mom was to leave the hospital. There was no telling how speaking to this man, for even the briefest of moments, might come back to haunt me. You sure about that? His words were suggestive, his tone unusually serious. I came to a halt despite myself. What on earth is that supposed to mean? I knew that wasn't the cause of what would follow. But still, somewhere deep down inside, I can't help believing everything would have been different if only I'd walked away. I mean, you can't just ignore the birth of your little brother, can you? What? Little brother? When I turned back to face him, the man was wiping at his rain-damp forehead with a knowing smirk on his face. Guess you didn't see this article? Not that it's the sort of magazine you'd be reading, Yumiko-chan. The reporter reached out and presented me with a magazine already open to a certain article. Practically grabbing it from his hands, I ran my eyes frantically across the page. And the moment I saw that headline, the blood in my veins seemed to freeze solid. East Beach Express president Sakaki Michiaki's illegitimate child? Long-awaited son born to a mistress. Bold sans serif headlines, emphasized by sharp decorative flourishes. Below, the face of a man I hadn't seen in a while lined up with a portrait of his unfamiliar partner, so... Sounds like her father cheated on his wife with some other woman? Yeah, cause cause Yumiko's mother, apparently wasn't in good enough shape to keep on giving birth to more children, so he had to basically just cheat on her. Paragraphs full of vicious words I could barely stand to read. And at the very end, one sentence that plunged me below even despair. As I had doubted my ears in a hospital room weeks before, this time I doubted my eyes. Currently arranging for a divorce from his wife. Those few brief words, buried in the final paragraph as if they were the most trivial thing in the world, hit me with the force of a hurricane. I heard the rumors. I more or less understand the father was that sort of person. But there was no worse way to have those suspicions confirmed. Why? Why now when my mother was recuperating in the hospital? Why now when she was finally getting better? Was this article even true? Many thoughts swirled chaotically through my head. My hands trembled and lost their hold on a hateful piece of paper. Whoa, hey now, don't drop it. This is a source in its own right, you know? The magazine fell to the wet pavement with a slap. As it hit the ground, the pages had been folded back, flipped around, revealing the cover. One final piece of information was revealed to me. This magazine. A tasteful work from a well-known painter behind a number of carefully arranged headlines in a firm serif typeface. A weekly magazine, but one that clearly distinguished itself from the tabloids of gossip rags, a magazine of some credibility. A magazine my mother asked for. Oh, fuck off! Fuck off! A magazine my mother asked for every week. Yeah, so that's how it is. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this as a new big sister if you could spare. Screams to the sky in complete and utter despair. Those are my thoughts. I mean, if I scream now, I'm probably gonna maybe wake my brother or my mother up. Screams as loud as humanly possible. Yeah, that's what I want to do right now. Charging off the sidewalk that ran along the prefectural highway, I sprinted all along a farm road, slanting diagonally the way through fields of green. The path didn't turn towards my school, so it offered an ever so slightly more direct route. It was only a farm road, and places hadn't even been paved, so it was hard to run. If Mom reads that! Didn't have the luxury of worrying about that right at the moment. Needed to stop my mother. With the recent improvement in her condition, Mom had started to leave her room and visit the hospital store to purchase her own books and magazines. There's at least a chance they'd check for articles that might upset her. Hard to imagine the clerks in the shop would have been told to do the same. Halfway there, I can no longer muster the effort to keep my umbrella up right above me. I let the rain strike me and focus all my attention on running. The water went flying with every heavy stride, slapping against my legs, soaking my skirt. The small ember of satisfaction warming my chest only minutes before had been smothered completely out of existence. I was cold to my very core. Excuse me, no running in the halls, please. I'm sorry. My momentum barely slowed after arriving to the hospital. I understood perfectly well that running in the hallways was off limits, but the rules I'd always obeyed mattered less than reaching my destination even a moment sooner. Turning a corner on the 3rd floor, and then my feet came to an abrupt halt. There was something unusual going on in front of that familiar door. For a moment, I was simply bewildered. 3 strange men in expensive suits were standing just outside my mother's room, talking to each other, just on the verge of entering. A vague but powerful sense of dread ran through my body like a jolt of electricity. What are you doing here? I shouted angrily as I approached. The man who had been reaching for the door hesitated. Before I could continue, the white-haired man at the head of the little group preempted me with a question. Pardon me, but who are you? I'm the daughter of Sakaki Misaki, who is currently recuperating in this room. And who are you people supposed to be? What do you want my mother? My apologies for not introducing myself. My name is Suda, currently serving as the Sakaki family's chief legal advisor. I have a minor matter to discuss with your mother, so I decided to drop by for a visit. Do you know she's in? Currently arranging for a divorce. In a heartbeat, my mind connected to those words. This lawyer's sudden arrival. I won't let you see her. What? You came here to set up a divorce between Mom and Dad, didn't you? My mother's not well. You have to understand what's going to happen to discuss that with her now. You seem to be under a grave misunderstanding. We're simply here to discuss your mother's future on your own. Liar. I read it on a magazine just now. I know everything. He must have been trying to reach us before that information did. Nothing for it, I guess. Hey. With a small move of the lawyer's hand, the 2 men have been hanging back moved quickly towards me. Huh? They had me physically subdued before I could even register surprise. One man had slipped behind me and caught my arms in a firm full Nelson. The other stood in front of me like a wall, eliminating any chance of escape. Let me go! I screamed desperately, but they weren't the sort of people to flinch at the cries of a young woman. The private wing was never a busy place. Today it was entirely empty, and with the heavy rain drumming down outside, I doubt anyone elsewhere in the building even heard my voice. And of course, against the strength of 2 full-grown adults, a child like myself was completely powerless. Please behave yourself for the moment, miss. The lawyer's voice had grown cold. It was the all-too-familiar voice of an adult. My name is Suda. I'm an attorney. I have something to discuss with you, if that would be acceptable. Please excuse the intrusion. His words were extremely polite. If anything, that made them all the more frightening. Ignoring my tear-choked plea, he pushed open the door to my mother's hospital room. I was the first to react. The bed sitting there was now empty. Stepped out, eh? We'll just wait for her return. So yeah, basically you're saying she's supposed to be here. So she's gone already? Normally it wouldn't be unusual to move a patient only 3 days from discharge back into the hospital's general ward, but my mother's condition was still delicate. Her physician had decided to handle everything cautiously until the very end. It wasn't possible Mom simply stepped out this time of day. What is this? Who are you people? The doctor had arrived for his daily rounds. For a moment, he simply stared at the bizarre scene inside the room with confusion in his eyes. Doctor, my mother! My mother's missing! Before the lawyer could stand to offer a greeting, I yelped out from the corner where the man had deposited me. I thought she'd been told she was resting in bed only a few minutes ago. Isn't that right? Yes, I'm sure she was here. The startled nurse looked around the room as if expecting to find my mother hiding in a corner. It was all too much for me to process. Everything was moving forward smoothly only an hour ago, but now we were derailed, hurtling rapidly away into darkness and confusion, all of our painstaking work falling apart around us. I had to look for my mother. I had to keep her from finding out about that article. I had to get this out of this room, away from these people. Countless thoughts stampeded wildly through my head, but there was just one thing that seemed clear to me. I couldn't just sit there waiting. Before anything else, I had to find Mom. And all of a sudden I remembered. The words rang out so clearly in my ears that for a moment I thought she was really there speaking to me. Move! Pushing my way around the man who'd been holding me in check, I slipped past the doctor and dashed out into the deserted hallway. Hey, where do you think you're going? I heard voices from behind. I ignored them. I didn't have any real proof, but there was nothing else for me to go on, so I had no choice but to cling to my intuition. Taking the stairs two at a time, I headed for the very top of the building. By the time I managed to struggle all the way to the rooftop, my breath was coming in quick, ragged gasps, and my legs were burning beneath me. Thought I was ready to collapse. I sprinted from my house to the hospital, then from Mom's room up to the roof with barely a pause in between. But my exhaustion was the last thing on my mind. I threw myself against the door with the last of my momentum, swinging it open wide. Mom! Alone in the dark, engulfed by the roar of the rainstorm, I screamed for my mother. It was coming down so hard now, missiles rising from the bare concrete. Even seeing across the rooftop was a challenge. Naturally enough, given the weather, I couldn't make out any signs of human presence. She's not here? And a white shadow stood in the darkness. From her height and the length of her hair, I realized that once it was my mother. I splashed through the puddles to her side. She was staring blankly up into the sky, battered by the powerful rain, her entire body utterly soaked. What are you doing? You can't be outside right now, the rain's... I grabbed my mother by the shoulder and shook her frantically, trying to catch her attention, but her eyes were fixed on the sky. She didn't so much as budge. It was obvious at a glance that something was terribly wrong. Mom, what's wrong with... Halfway through the sentence, I noticed something lying on the ground at the very edge of my peripheral vision. It was flapping around in the wind. I was gonna say, like, drugs she overdosed on, but those don't flap around in the wind, so... What is it? I had a feeling I'd seen it before, not that long ago, in fact. That cover, that tasteful painting, the work of a well-known artist. Those headlines set in a restrained professional font. The magazine containing that article was lying on my mother's feet. My hand slipped off her shoulder. I staggered backward, barely staying on my feet. Why had this happened? Why did everything have to fall apart when we were finally starting to move forward? Why was my mother standing there soaking wet? Why did she have that blank expression on her face? Many questions bubbled to the surface of my mind, none of them had answers. They just sat there suspended in my mind, stagnating until they purified to a pool of solid sludge. My mother fixed her lifeless eyes on mine. I was startled. It was the first time for as long as I could remember my mother had looked me straight in the face. But that was without a doubt the worst possible way for that chain to be broken. I'm sorry, but who are you again? The words she spoke posed the question, but there was nothing like actual curiosity on it, and there was the voice of the machine. What are you saying? I wanted to desperately convince myself she was joking, but no matter how much I tried, I couldn't make myself believe it. The evidence before my eyes was simply too powerful. Who are you? Mom's face was paler than white. At the center of her wide eyes there were two bottomless dark wells where her pupils had been. Those tiny spots of black seemed more vast and more profound than the black sky stretching out endlessly above us. I was standing on the edge of an abyss and I was afraid. It felt as though I might fall into those pools of darkness and disappear. But I couldn't stop staring. I couldn't avert my eyes from the thing that was trying to swallow me whole. After all, she was the only person left in the world who'd ever acknowledged my existence. I called out to her, praying the word might pull her back from across the chasm that separated us, but it was too wide. My voice was too weak. I was too weak. I shrunk away just one step. My heels slid backward across the wet roof, and then just for a moment it felt as though my body was floating. Disoriented by a sharp impact on my backside, I didn't realize I'd been pushed out of the way until I saw the doctor moving past me. Hurry up, get her to a different wing. Don't let the other patients see her. As I sat stunned on the wet concrete, they took my vacant-eyed mother in their arms. They were carrying her off like an oversized doll away from me to someplace I didn't know. No! No! I don't think I can do Yumiko's voice justice right now, to be honest. I'd be screaming... Yeah, I'm pretty sure anyone would be screaming with, like, way more desperation than me right about now. No! No! Doesn't quite sound like someone who's, like, maybe never gonna see their mother again. Like, the one person they have to hold on to. Pushing myself up off the ground screaming, I ran towards her. I didn't make it 3 steps before another nurse caught me in her arms. Don't take her! Don't take Mom away! It's alright, Yumiko-san, it's alright. Stop it! Stop it! Don't take her away! Rising above the pattern of the black rain, a baleful roar filled the air. Crawling up from the depths of the earth, demolishing everything in its path. That sounded like a massive boulder, tumbling relentlessly across the world, merged with the scene before my eyes and engraved itself violently onto my heart. I tried to follow with my eyes as they carried her away. I strangled out one final cry. In response, the world filled with intense light, as though a dozen cameras had flashed at once. For a moment, I was dazzled. And by the time my vision returned to normal, there was nothing left to see. No, not quite nothing. On the otherwise empty roof, one waterlogged magazine remained. It was dissolving by now, paper melting away, ink blurring into illegibility, but my memory of the truth it contained won't disappear so easily. My broken mother was gone. The doctor who had smiled and told me she would be leaving the hospital was gone. I was absolutely alone. I crumbled where I stood. My knees hit the ground first, then my hands and my face. The white concrete was pleasantly cold against my cheek. Maybe if I lay here long enough, I would melt away and disappear. Just like that magazine. So cold. So hot. The ground was cold, but my body was hot. I used up everything I had. I was empty. I'd given up on the very idea of moving. The merciless rain continued to pour down on me. Jet black rain even though it wasn't night. The vicious dark water cooled around me, creeping up my body to swallow me whole. Sometimes I hate this country as 4 seasons. Just as I'm finally starting to forget, an autumn wind reminds me of a whispered insult. Winter skies bring back cold and lonely memories, and in summer, when the sudden evening storms arrive, I'm torn apart with every clap of thunder. Again and again until there's nothing left. 1 year after my mother's relapse, things had quieted down. The commotion of the hospital created a bit of a stir around town, but it didn't take long for the talk to trickle to a halt. For one thing, the main character in the story was no longer a resident. And even our cold-hearted country gossips seemed hesitant to turn a gravely ill woman's condition into one of their nasty little jokes. I was absent from school for a week after the incident, recovering from the shock and a mild case of pneumonia, but my life eventually returned to its normal rhythm. That would be the superficial summary, at least. The trauma of reading that magazine article led to a dramatic downturn in my mother's condition. She was now suffering from acute memory loss. Her physician, my grandparents, my father, and me, we were all strangers to Mom now. Everyone she met slipped out of her mind within minutes. These symptoms were far beyond anything a local hospital was equipped to handle. Soon after the incident, Mom was transferred to a specialized psychiatric institution in North Kanto. Ironically enough, that divorce never actually came to pass. Perhaps my father backed out of concern for his public image? That or was part of some conditional legal arrangement, I don't know. One thing was perfectly clear, the connection between the Sakaki and Kawamoto houses had been severed. My two families spent the first months after the incident squabbling by proxy about legal issues and the care of their mutual burdens. In the end, the Sakaki continued to cover my mother's medical expenses, but they were no longer providing supplementary support to the Kawamoto family's floundering business. We made them take responsibility for Misako, but now they're cutting off the aid entirely. What do you intend to do, dear? We'll have to just tighten our belts and get through with this. I'm sorry. You'll have to put up with it for now. To think the long-standing Kawamoto house would be reduced to such a meager lifestyle, and they expect us to take care of that girl on top of it all? Utterly ridiculous. Honestly, what did we do to deserve this? And of course, the easiest target for their bitterness was me. Once again, found myself wedged between a rock and a hard place. I had the bare minimum required for a normal life. I always kept up appearances after all, but not a day went by when I didn't hear sarcastic, scornful words from the shadows. I went to a silent school and returned to a silent home. I'd lost my refuge. I'd lost my hope. All I could do was suffer quietly. This would be the point where a normal person might go bad, but I have been living inside a cage for so long, not even that choice was available to me. There was a time just once when I tried approaching a group of girls with that sort of reputation. The result was pathetic. In that country town, even the delinquents were mindful of appearances. They turned their backs on me and walked away without a word. Shunned by even those lowest on the totem pole. For a long moment, I just stood there, rooted to the spot. And then I found myself looking up into the sky. It would look no different from the day I gazed out the window of my mother. Had Mom always been alone? Was that why she'd spent so much time watching something that never truly changed? Now that I was well and truly isolated, I began to think more about her feelings. I can't even cry. It seemed like a moment worthy of a little sobbing, but that just wasn't happening. On that day in the rain, I used up my lifetime supply of tears. All that was left was a parched, withered husk of a human being. For one long year, I did nothing but watch the sky change slowly above me. But soon enough, I was pulled down to the muddy stream once again. It was a little before the start of summer vacation. Our teacher had fallen ill that afternoon, and the final lesson was replaced by a study hall, which I spent gazing dully out the window. That exercise and pure boredom finally complete, I was walking sluggishly down the road toward my grandparents' house, just turning the final corner onto our street. Something was wrong about this picture. A shiny black luxury car was parked along the thickly hedged road in front of our house. The Kawamoto family didn't own a private automobile. My grandfather apparently had one back in the days when the business was doing well, but it was one of the first things to go when the recession hit. The negotiations with the Sakaki family had always been held in the business office by the station. So it's hard to imagine why a car could have possibly come. I wonder who that is. After 2 or 3 minutes, a voice called to me from inside our house. "You're late, Yumiko-chan. Come on in. Hurry." I was startled. The friendly attitude was one thing, but it was the very first time since I arrived that my grandmother had called me by my name. She wouldn't have done that without a very good reason. And it was the first time in a good 4 years I'd been in that room. The instant that I crossed the threshold, 5 men in black suits stood up simultaneously and bowed in greeting. As I blinked in bewilderment, my grandmother spoke, a strange little smile twisting her face. "Come on, Yumiko-chan. Sit down right there. This discussion isn't going anywhere without you." And with that, she sat me at the head of the table. The dusty air of the rarely used parlor tickling my nose. I looked around me. All 5 of them had deeply serious expressions on their faces. To be honest, I wanted nothing more than to run away. What on earth is this all of a sudden? "We've come for you on the instructions of your father. Been very worried about you since the incident last year. Accordingly, we were sent here to take you home." What on earth was this man talking about? After the incident with Mom, my father hadn't showed up in this house even once. I understood they had a busy professional life, but he didn't even bother to send a message or replace a phone call. Now they expected me to believe he was worried? After a full year? Ridiculous. It was mystifying Grandma had even let them in the house, let alone with that simpering grin on her face. Didn't she understand this was nonsense? But soon I discovered my grandmother's reactions were perfectly lucid for reasons that had nothing to do with any of that. "Isn't that wonderful? Now you can attend a good school and live with your father again. Don't have a thing to worry about anymore. I'm happy for you. It seems your father will be helping this house again. This really is a happy day for us all." Now I understood. This was a question with no choices. My grandparents had decided this answer beforehand, and were now unilaterally forcing me towards it. I was so profoundly astonished at their naked self-interest that I couldn't even manage any anger. But it's not as if snapping at them would have achieved anything in the first place. Remaining with them was probably never really an option. I understand, I'll prepare at once. Come now, dear, there's no need to hurry. The gentleman from the Sakaki house said they'll be paying us another visit tomorrow, so until then... They're paying us a visit right now, so I'll leave in that car. Is that so? If that's what you want to do, I suppose there's no helping it, right, dear? Absolutely, it's completely up to you. I was about ready to vomit. From my grandmother's words, it seemed clear the Sakaki had come with a clear offer in hand. My return in exchange for restored financial support to the Kawamoto business. My grandparents had considered me a burden from the start, so I imagine they didn't exactly hesitate. They probably felt like selling some piece of junk from the backyard for a huge sum at auction. How sordid. I tried muttering the words, but couldn't match much conviction. After all, I was scuttling around the same sordid web. How could I complain? I wasn't working for my food. I pulled all the clothes out of my chest of drawers, threw them onto my tatami mat, and scowled down at them. This is goodbye. I wasn't speaking to my grandparents, the house, or even my mother. It was a farewell to the person who had lived here, idly wasting day after empty day, accomplishing nothing but growing older. I spoke those words to confirm a simple fact. That room was nothing to me. It held nothing of me. One by one, I cut the clothes I'd worn into place to shreds. The expensive-looking children's clothes I brought with me. The generic ready-made supermarket clothes my grandparents had bought me when Anita rose. My middle school uniforms. My face and emotional mess, I could carefully chop them into tiny pieces. All done. My preparations were complete. Grabbing the scrap clothes with both hands, I shoved them right back into my chest of drawers. It took less than a minute to toss my everyday belongings, art supplies, and sketchbooks into my bag. Just like that, my life in that place was over. I didn't look back. After a stiff, formulaic goodbye to my grandparents, I dropped by my school for a few brief formalities and then began the journey home. Of course, I hadn't seen that home in many years. I had only the vaguest memories of the house itself. I was sincerely happy to be leaving my grandparents behind, but it didn't make me any less uncertain about the new life being thrust on me so abruptly. The car headed north at high speed, moving from the coastline to the outskirts of the metropolitan area. We were heading for the heart of West Tokyo. How much longer till we arrive? 30 minutes from now. I see. 60 kilometers as the crow flies. That was the distance from my grandparents' house to that of my father. In the end, my mother had never managed to return to a place less than an hour away by car. And I myself was only coming back on someone else's power. Didn't have the slightest idea what was coming next. I wasn't particularly hopeful, but I didn't feel much in the way of despair either. It would be enough if I could just spend my days quietly until I finally became an adult. With that thought, I closed my eyes and waited for the car to arrive at its destination. Just as the chief secretary had told me, we reached my new home about 30 minutes later. It's huge. The house was very different from the patchwork image I had sewn together from fragments of childhood memories. Far more magnificent than I remembered it. From the outside, the building itself looked like a Western-style mansion straight out of a manga. The spacious gardens were surrounded by a high wall. The grounds were covered in so many tall, beautiful trees that it could have been a park. I had hazy memories of those things, but after years in the country, their scale and magnificence took me by surprise. But on an emotional level, the sight left me cold. My father's actions were one thing, my obedient return at his whistle was another. No matter how splendid the house might have been, when I thought about the foundation it was built on, my thoughts naturally took a turn for the better. If I was coming back with Mom. Return to the house and... The uninspiring luxury was all the more pronounced inside the house itself. As I took off my shoes and looked around the gleaming entrance hall, I heard footsteps approaching from a side passage. Yumiko, you're back. You really have grown up. It probably would have taken some time to recognize the person standing in front of me if not for the recent photograph I'd seen in a certain magazine 1 year before. Face to face with my father for the first time in what felt like decades, I saw a middle-aged man with a reasonably healthy complexion, but a subtle hint of something like gloom in his eyes. Yes, I've returned. What's the matter? You don't sound very energetic. Tired out by the long car ride? I was more taken aback than anything else, considering the way he had treated Mom and me up until that point. His aggressively friendly attitude was incomprehensible. From what I can remember, my father and I had only spoken a bare handful of times when I was a child, and certainly never like that. His motives weren't clear to me, but the sudden attempt at intimacy was off-putting. I didn't quite know how to respond to it. I'll just go back to my room and rest for a while. Of course. Whatever you want, Yumiko. Please excuse me. Heading back to the one part of the house I remembered well. My very first place of refuge. The bedroom in which I had spent so many hours as a young child. I climbed the stairs and found my room without the slightest hesitation. Remembering its location so exactly prompted a brief swell of nostalgic emotion. That soon gave way to that recurring sense of disgust. My memories there weren't exactly happy in their own right. Huh? The room I entered for the first time in years was so completely changed that I couldn't help but raise my voice in surprise. The badly mismatched desk and bed had been cleared away. In their place was a complete arrangement of fancy furniture and pretty little luxury items. Exactly the sort of things that might appeal to a girl of my age. They went out of their way to prepare this? Every part of the decor seemed as if it could have come straight from the set of a movie. The room was filled with fragile, ephemeral things. Felt as they'd disappear like soap bubbles if I actually touched them. Normally they would have made me happy, but at the moment it seemed like a hollow gesture. I'm home, Mom. Sitting on my bed, I murmured those words to myself. I finally managed to return to that house, but my mother wasn't with me. All I had there was a forced, artificial welcome for the man who had broken her. Would I simply resume the same numb, miserable life in a different setting? Staring up at the ceiling, I could feel the familiar jet-black sludge growing thick inside my chest. I fought down the crushing feelings of despair as best I could, closed my eyes, and fell asleep. The next day, my father had arranged beforehand for my transfer to an all-girls school some 20 minutes from the mansion by car. It was a very prestigious institution. I actually recognized the name. I felt badly out of place, uncomfortable in my new uniform in this beautiful school building. Hey, is that girl? Right, from the Sakaki family. I could hear the whispers from all sides. Entering the classroom, I sat quietly at an open desk as far from the others as possible. There was an improvement in one regard. The talk about me wasn't particularly cruel or hostile. There's gotta be something going on with her. Yes, she seems a little difficult to approach, but essentially I was treated just like before. My classmates interacted with me in a business-like way when necessary, and otherwise largely pretended I wasn't there. A school full of young ladies from upper-crust families was surprisingly uncomfortable in its own way. Nice weather. Found myself instinctively heading for the rooftop. After gazing up for a moment, I settled down against the concrete support near the edge of the roof and took out my sketchbook. I began to draw the sky above me. A simple pencil hatching, rendering the clouds and sky in shades of grey. That afternoon, I couldn't stand to look at the world. Anything my eyes settled on repulsed me. That empty sky was the only thing I could bring myself to observe calmly. The driver held open the front door of the house for me. I was delivered to school and back. I didn't even have to open my own doors anymore. That extreme courtesy only intensified my discomfort. Welcome home, miss. The household employees greeted me with smiles so soft and mild it was slightly nauseating. When I answered the brief nod, they began to bombard me with words in rapid succession, their tone eager and openly professional. Would you care for anything to eat? That's alright, I'm going to return to my room. But shall I bring you a drink? That's alright as well, I'm not particularly thirsty. Inform me if there's anything we can do for you? Yes. Climbing slowly up the stairs, I heaved a heavy sigh. Would they be putting on that sort of show every single day from now on? Their deference was so transparently artificial that it was painful rather than flattering. Given my current position, it might be possible to order them to stop acting like that. But I didn't know what repercussions that would have. Especially if they were to report to my father. I ended up deciding it would be best not to make waves at such an early stage. I'd been able to postpone it for one day with excuses about my fatigue, but the time had come. It's been a long time since we had a meal together like this, hasn't it? A glass of wine in one hand, my father turned a radiant smile on me. Yes. Inside my head, I spat out the words as the first time. From the moment I sat down in front of that luxurious dinner and my beaming father, I was immediately filled with desperate longing to flee. Tried a little of the sautéed duck on my plate just to kill a few seconds, but it seemed strangely tasteless and without texture. Your teachers are already singing your praises. Your results on the admissions test were superb. It seems the difference in academic level compared to your old school shouldn't be much of a problem. Yes. All I could do was manage to nod and mechanically shovel the food placed in front of me into my mouth. Course after course, and I couldn't taste a thing. Had they even put any salt on these? It was like eating hunks of rubber. Carrying things in my mouth solely for the sake of chewing on them didn't make for a pleasant dining experience. Gradually, I began to ignore my plate in favor of frequent sips of water. I feel sick. The tasteless food, Dad's barrage of praise, and myself sitting there, passively accepting it all. Everything about the scene made me sick. My emotions only grew darker with every passing minute. This was all some bizarre whim of my father's. That or a meaningless ceremony he was carrying out in pursuit of some hidden objective? What else could it possibly be? Have you been letting your hair grow out all this time? I felt my breath catch in my throat. That summer day. The day when the heat had poured down on me like a rain of molten iron. The one I had clawed at my chest and hacked at my own hair in a spasm of self-loathing. It all came flooding vividly back. Yes. I almost told him that I cut it short once. But what would be the point of explaining that to this man? It would only throw this little play into chaos. What on earth did my father mean by asking me a question like that? Why bring up the very thing that had marked me as worthless? I have to say, it really suits you. Yumiko? Excuse me. Rising from my seat, I ran out of the room, both hands pressed tightly across my mouth. Hey, what was in that food? I could hear my father snarling at someone behind me, but didn't have time to be worrying about that. Acid burned my mouth as I vomited the tasteless food out into the toilet bowl. None of it had the slightest flavor going down, but coming back up, it was powerfully unpleasant. It seemed a bit unfair somehow. What sort of sick joke is this? Wasn't my sex the entire reason he cast Mom aside? What on earth was my father thinking? How could he say that? Why? He never even looked at me before. This had to be some kind of whim. Either that, or I needed to do so for some work-related reason. This place is just as bad. How long would it take before I could find a safe haven? This was no better than living with my grandparents. No, in the countryside, at least I wasn't expected to do anything. There were expectations of me here. That made it even more agonizing. Tasting the acid rising once more from the depths of my throat, I descended to self-pity. I would have truly preferred to shut myself up in a dark shed, to reject the world and do nothing at all for the rest of my life. But so long as I needed food to eat and a bed to sleep in, I had no choice but to play along with my father's momentary kindness. The thought triggered a new wave of nausea. One week passed. People often say that time flies when you're having fun. Perhaps it's true because those first 7 days seemed to last a century. Hanging my bag next to my desk, I pulled out my notes and textbooks. I was isolated and out of place as ever in my new school. I was studying a good deal, but that was simply my way of killing the vast stretches of otherwise painfully empty time I spent here. It had nothing to do with my father's praise. I hadn't sketched for a few days now. For one thing, the weather had been dull and gray, so I couldn't look up without remembering that day, and I just hadn't been in the mood in the first place. Even when I opened my sketchbook today, I'd only end up with another drawing of the sky, as if they didn't have enough of those already. Those vaguely self-mocking thoughts stopped me on the way up to the roof, redirecting my path down to the lower floor. My life was a steady line from one meaningless moment to the next. Okay, I think it really makes sense with we would just have like only another drawing of the sky anyways, because yeah, basically just for the most part, aside from like few really traumatic events, Yumiko's life is basically just non-changing, and as such, her drawings, the subject of her drawings, therefore makes sense if those aren't changing either. Just like another day of like being ignored by your classmates, just as if like you didn't even exist in the first place. Going back to your home where you also are being treated as if you don't exist. Barely anyone has like any interest in you. It's more about like the family business. No wonder she's always like, it makes sense that she'd also just be like naturally drawing the same thing over and over again. That or maybe the writers are just brilliant in that regards. Identical days trickled by. Yeah, or that's maybe just something I'm seeing with like the quote-unquote cleverness of why she's always like finding herself drawing the same thing over and over. There was one thing that began to change in the course of that week. Human beings are frighteningly adaptable creatures. The meals with my father that at first repulsed me to the point of vomiting were gradually growing tolerable. Sometimes I hated myself for that, but little by little, I was coming to understand that it wasn't just the result of my mind acclimatizing itself to the situation. Have you gotten used to your new school? Yes. Not sure it'll make friends soon enough back in my day. My father was making a genuine effort. With gentle advice and anecdotes about his own experiences, he tried to reassure me. Apparently Dad had gone through many transfers in his student years and always struggled with how to present himself to his new classmates. I was beginning to learn a number of surprisingly personal things about my father as he persistently tried to draw me into conversation. Then again, I guess everything must be very different these days. Sorry to lecture you, Yumiko. That's alright. And he wasn't pushy or arrogant about it. He always seemed to be considering my point of view. Just as I'd heard, Dad was on an extremely tight schedule. Even when he returned home, it was extremely rare for him to stay overnight. Most frequently, he would return to his company immediately after dinner. But that also meant he was coming home solely to share a meal with me. I gradually grew less prickly and slightly more communicative. By now I could eat dinner with him without hint of queasiness. What is it, Yumiko? No, it's nothing. Just as something was about to spill out of my mouth, Mom's pale, empty face would flash before my eyes. I silently reminded myself, this man is responsible for my mother's suffering. That fundamental resentment hasn't faded. I won't let it fade. Lying on my bed in my darkened room, I thought things over. I was no less uncertain than when I first arrived at that place, but the reasons for that inner turmoil were beginning to change. At first, I've been simply disgusted by his overfamiliarity. At that point, it was hard to dismiss as some bizarre game. Sometimes I could almost take his friendliness at face value. Even that remark about my hair might have been intended as nothing more than a casual compliment. Such positive interpretations were beginning to seem plausible. A little late for that now. I tried mumbling negative words to myself, but the nagging doubts remained. My distant mother had grown kind when her condition improved. The situation was clearly different, but there was always the possibility my father had undergone a similar change in the years since I'd seen him last. Tossing and turning in my bed, I turned the questions over in my mind. I'd been cold for so long, but little by little I could feel something like warmth returning to my body. I'll just end up being betrayed again. This time will be different. With two opposing answers battling indecisively in my mind, I waited for dawn to come. Two months after my return to Tokyo, my life was beginning to change even outside the house. School didn't seem particularly unpleasant anymore. It wasn't so difficult being alone in that place once you got used to it. So long as I quietly attended my classes, the entire day would easily pass enough. Never disliked studying, so once my mood took a turn for the better, it didn't feel like wasted time. Then continued drawing. As my mind grew calm, my art slowly began to change as well. My perspective pointed straight up for Seoul and began to creep downward. Every once in a while, I'd include a townscape or two among my sketches. It wasn't principle to me to be finding enjoyment in that life, but there was no point sulking forever. My sardonic feelings of self-reproach slowly faded. I began to look at the world around me more calmly. Welcome home, miss. I'm back. Even those brutally awkward interactions with the household employees had gotten more tolerant with the passage of time. After a few weeks, they picked up on my non-reactions and began to tone down their aggressive approach. They would generally back off after letting me know they were available if I needed them. And then I was actually asking them for something every once in a while. Will you be heading straight to your room today? Yes, I think so. Very well, have a pleasant evening. After asking the maid to have someone call me when it's time for dinner, I returned to my room. Sitting down in front of my desk, I thought back over the last few months. My attitude towards that new life were beginning to soften in many ways. That one exception, I was stubbornly continuing to keep my father at arm's length. His behavior hadn't changed. He continued to treat me kindly all the while. Nonetheless, I offered him nothing but brief, monosyllabic answers, vaguely avoiding his questions. That only seemed natural at first. What else could he expect after how he treated my mother after abandoning me for years? That resentment seemed to justify my behavior. But months had passed, and I just couldn't see any sign of the cruel man I thought he was. At least not when he was interacting with me. Nearly every night, I rejected his gentle attempts to draw me into conversation. My father didn't seem to be letting that bother him, but I was beginning to feel increasingly guilty about my attitude. What am I supposed to do? It'll be time for dinner soon. For a very different reason than before, I started to find that time somewhat painful. He came up again today. A professor from Meguro Medical School told everyone Sakaki-san's daughter is cute as a button and smart as a whip. I see. Makes me very happy you've grown up in such a fine young lady, Yumiko. This man had interacted with me as something close to an ideal father for 2 straight months. That day, as always, all that came out of his mouth were words of praise and concern for me. Uneasy feelings smoldered away quietly inside my chest. Tell me, Yumiko. I couldn't endure his gaze. I found myself hanging my head. Yumiko. I didn't dislike being praised, not at all. He was making time in an extremely busy life for me. I wasn't yet cynical enough to dismiss that. Sometimes I felt myself on the verge of being grateful. I'm sorry. That black rhyme was still inside me. There was always that other emotion struggling against my guilt. As long as that remained, I would never allow myself to get any closer to my father. Is this about your mother? I felt myself twitch with surprise. Until that point, I deliberately steered clear of that particular topic. I'd assumed my father was intentionally avoiding it as well, so the turn of the conversation came as a real shock. I was never sure if I should talk to you about it, but can't expect you to understand if I don't explain myself, can I? It's alright, I was in the wrong here. My father slowly began to speak. He spoke about his feelings towards my mother, how it felt when she left, and behind everything, the constant stress his incredibly demanding job had placed on their marriage. Everything my father told me turned my image of him completely on its head. When the two of you left, I thought my heart was going to break. There were many times when I was ready to go and take both of you back. But I was drowning in work and I never found the courage to try. In time, my increasingly isolated father began to seek comfort. He admitted that the affair described in the magazine article had happened at that time. I was lonely too, and there was so much going on at the company. I knew it was wrong, but I ended up betraying your mother. When I heard about that magazine article, the first thing on my mind was protecting your mother from the consequences of my mistake. So I sent over the lawyer right away, but it was consistent. The actions that seemed so inhumanly cruel at the time could also be explained by my father's story. After all, the lawyer never got the chance to speak with my mother. There was no proof he'd been sent to serve her with divorce papers. But even so, couldn't help myself but returned his gaze. At some point, I'd forgotten to avert my eyes. Do you think you could forgive me? It was a gentle voice. I'd begun to think I would never hear a voice like that ever again from anyone. And yet it was coming to me from him, the person whose acceptance in a way I always wanted most. Many thoughts flooded into my head in the confused jumble. Those words were more than powerful enough. My fragile defensive wall finally sprung a leak. I'm sorry. I'm sorry, Dad, I need to. I slid from my chair, turned away from that concerned face, and hurried out to the hallway. Halfway covering my face with my right hand, I stumbled up the stairs as best as I could. On the way up, I caught a glimpse of a servant staring at me in shock, but I wasn't composed enough to pay that any mind. The world was growing hazy before I even reached my floor. And the instant I closed the door to my room behind me, the tears came pouring down my face. One drop stained the ivory carpet beneath my feet, then another. I can't believe, Dad said. It was hard to understand. I couldn't reconcile the man with the vicious, vulgar person the magazines described. There were so many things about him that confused me. But I couldn't believe he'd spoken those words for show. It sounded as if they'd come from the heart. Just as Mom had come to regret the cruel things she said to me, perhaps Dad was simply trying to make up for his mistakes. Looking at it from that angle, it wouldn't be so hard to accept his apology. Would it be alright? Tell me, Mom. I had one photograph of my mother left, safe in the memory of my mobile phone. But as always, her face was turned to the side. I couldn't read her expression. Would it be alright if I really did become happy? My life had been shades of grey for so very long. Little by little, I could see colors beginning to emerge. It was a pleasant feeling. The air was still a little cold, but the sky that day was remarkably beautiful. Putting down my brush, I stretched out and muttered a few words to no one in particular. I suppose that's enough for today. Getting so absorbed in my art was easy to forget the time. There have been a few incidents where I kept my car waiting long enough to cause some anxiety, so I started making a conscious effort to check my watch frequently. I examined my sketchbook. Instead of the sky I'd been devoted to for so long, today I painted the rooftop flower bed. I've been painting things like this now. After months of obsessively sketching the clouds, the change had taken me by surprise. Which I guess, coincidentally, the changes in what she's drawing is also coincidentally seems to be like lining up with more potential changes in Yumiko's life, such as, you know, to maybe reconcile with her father. Maybe, like, quote-unquote, become happy. For a while, I just gazed down at that image, various emotions running through me. Oh no, I'll be late. Turns out I was a little slow coming home after all. My life changed rapidly after my father's apology. The dinners together that had once been so painful were now something I looked forward to. I talked to him about many things. My art, formerly sketches of the sky in black pencil, had become increasingly colorful work executed with paintbrushes. Even my life at school was shifting for the better. Do you have a moment? Ida-san, of course. A girl who stood him out even among the young ladies in our class, Ida Kanako, had begun to approach me on a regular basis. I didn't quite follow this part. Would you mind helping me? Classical literature translation? This definitely was a tricky one. Hold on just a second. We struck up a conversation about our work in art class one day and have been talking like this pretty frequently ever since. She wasn't quite a friend yet, but up until then I've never had actual conversations in school with anyone but the teachers. By my standards, it was an enormous step forward. Thank you, that was very helpful. Your explanations are always so clear and concise, Sakaki-san. I wasn't doing anything special. That's not true. You might make a very good teacher someday. A perfectly normal, unremarkable little scene. But in comparison to the emptiness of my life before then, those moments made every day feel astonishingly fresh and new. Welcome back, Dad. Hello there, Yumiko. I'm home. Still an incredibly busy man, nonetheless he would always come home at least a few times every week to have dinner with me. I used to only see his face during the meal itself, but recently I started greeting him at the door with a natural smile on my face. So today, Ida-san and I talked for a long time. That friend you were telling me about before? We're not quite friends yet, but... Previously, my father talked and talked while I offered only brief responses, but the situation was largely reversed. I told Dad about everything. Every trivial little thing in my life. No matter what the topic. He never failed to hear me out with a smile. That made me happy. You know, Yumiko. Once Misako gets better, why don't the three of us take a trip abroad? Huh? Maybe you have something else in mind? I'd like to go to an amusement park. Come on, you can go to one of those anytime you like. Yeah, but I'd like to go together. My father looked mystified. Still, I stuck to my guns. When I was small and very lonely, the idea of a family visit to an amusement park had enchanted me. I was well past the age to be begging for a trip like that, but that secret yearning had never really gone away. We can reserve it and have the whole place to ourselves. Doesn't have to be anything like that, just a normal trip. You really are a modest one, Yumiko. Okay, then, once Misako, Mom gets better, let's go to an amusement park. All three of us. Dad spoke those words with a smile. It was the first time I'd asked him for anything, even as my days became happier. I'd been careful not to say anything greedy about the things I wanted. I suppose I couldn't quite believe that tranquil life was real. If I asked too much of the dream, I was afraid it might just fall apart underneath me. Today, Dad and I talked about that. Okay. Ever since that day, the size of my diary entries had increased exponentially. Where I used to write nothing happened again and again, ripping off the bottom of the page for scrap paper. Now I was often running out of space before I could cover everything. In the center of my room, a canvas stood on an easel, surrounded by a colorful array of art supplies, all things I purchased and used frequently. It's really going to be alright now, isn't it? Will something happen again? Will it fall apart in the blink of an eye? Everything was so peaceful at times it made me uneasy. Come to think of it, those few days before my mother was scheduled to leave the hospital, it felt very much the same. Maybe I'll add a postscript. I hope this lasts forever. I'm quite sure I scribbled those words at the end of my diary entry. It was the one small wish I would allow myself. The rainy season had come and gone. Summer was fast approaching. It was a day like any other. Reading on the internet that the weather would be taking a turn for the worse in the afternoon, I called off my usual rooftop painting session and went home a little early. Are you sure? It's a little bit of a walk. I'm in the mood for a little fresh air. They said it'd be raining in the evening, but for the moment it was a pleasant afternoon, well suited to a bit of light exercise. Therefore I got out of the car halfway and walked the remaining kilometer or so home. There wasn't any real reason for that, it was just a whim. When I opened the front door and slipped inside, I found the entrance hall empty of the servants who were usually there to greet me. No one's here? It was probably because I returned so suddenly. Even when I closed the door behind me, the hallway remained silent. Maybe they're in the kitchen? Not that it really bothered me either way. I began to move towards the stairs. So in regards to that, Yumiko-san doesn't seem to have noticed anything. But a voice from deeper in the hallway stopped me in my tracks. If that woman hadn't happened to speak my name at the very moment, without a doubt I would have shrugged, gone up the stairs to my room and stayed completely oblivious. They're talking about me? From the other side I can hear 3 employees talking about something. Everything seems to be proceeding smoothly enough for the moment then, right? Yumiko seems to have completely taken to the master by now. Sakaki is instructed us to remain vigilant regarding her behavior. Make sure to let me know if anything happens, of course. They were speaking quietly, but I can make out their conversation clearly enough. What are they talking about? I shouldn't be listening to this. My throbbing heart was making that very clear. But my feet wouldn't budge, and my ears were intent on capturing every word of the discussion. This is quite the change of heart drama. I didn't think he had it in. The son and heir apparent dies, and all of a sudden he grabs a daughter with the best grades and most submissive personality. Sakaki-sama is not exactly hard to understand, is he? Okay, so that's why we never heard about the son before. He literally, like, he was literally already dead before, like, the main story actually began, so that's why we never heard this quote-unquote son. Up to this, well, up to the point where we saw Yumiko's backstory. The son dies, so he just settles for the next best thing. The mistress of his sure didn't stick around long after her kid died. Well, lost her meal ticket and all. My body began to tremble. It was a part of the story I'd almost pushed out of my mind by now. That mistress and the boy she'd supposedly given birth to. So her kid died and then she just left. Because her value was basically just entirely determined by that kid she had. Lost her meal ticket and all. Her existence basically like lost all of its value when her kid just killed over. He died? I always thought it was strange. My dad called for me when he did. Why suddenly approach a daughter you tossed aside once before? I mean, hiring a detective agency to get information on his own daughter? And then he plays it off like he's been keeping a fatherly eye on her all along. I thought this was his way of atoning for my mother's suffering. So what? He didn't fucking care at all, right? He still doesn't care at all, apparently. Right? Naoki had the slightest interest before, but didn't have to get He had to pretend otherwise to get the girl dancing on his strings. They really did go all out with that whole act. That's gotta qualify as kind of brainwashing, right? Start off a little awkwardly, then jab at the heart of the matter and let it all come out. I hear they called an expert to work out that strategy. I thought that was his attempt at finally becoming a father to me. And the little miss fell for it, hook, line, and sinker, huh? No, I simply convinced myself it had to be that way. Deep down I knew all along that it couldn't possibly have been true. Will you cut it out already? That little miss you're discussing will be coming home soon. Yes, sir. Nobody even knew she existed a little while ago, but the instant she becomes valuable as a tool, it's the royal treatment. Quite the world we live in. Of course, he'll be gone in 5 minutes flat if he manages to make himself another boy somewhere. You have no idea, just... I wanted to almost literally just punch my monitor the moment that text came up on screen. I was just almost ready to just fucking, like... just duke it out with my inanimate monitor the moment that popped up on screen, like... I'm offended and, like, I'm a dude. I'm not like, I was never like some object basically just being used for like a family business and that had me offended. Of course, she'll be gone in 5 minutes flat if he manages to make himself another boy somewhere. You fucking people. You sicken me, you people. Alright, there's always that option. I paid money to see the moment he finally drops that world's best dad number. And then there's more than enough of that. Yes, sir. With that languid response, the group disappeared. Even long after the footsteps faded away, I stood there in silence, perfectly still. An idle question occurred to me. What sort of an expression do I have on my face right now? What sort of expression do people make at times like these? I felt oddly detached from reality, as though watching a movie projected before my eyes by some hidden camera. Eventually I took one step, then another. I dragged myself up the stairs on legs that didn't feel like my own. They said it would be raining in the evening, but the afternoon was pleasant. Well suited to a bit of light exercise. Therefore I got out of the car halfway and walked the remaining kilometer or so home. There wasn't any real reason for that. And so I could only curse God. I reached my room, it was far too quiet inside. I almost begun to forget how painful the absence of sound could be. I almost begun to find the silence comfortable. Okay then, what's Misako? Mom gets better. Let's go to an amusement park, all three of us. How could you say that? With a smile on your face. Scraps of notebook paper danced around me. Fragments of the word dad. Fragments of the word happy. Fragments of sentences highlighted in bright colors. Months and months of my life scattered through the air. The upper half of my painting was thick with dabs of blue and yellow paint. That was the first part to go. With a harsh rip, the cloth tore away from one of the screws holding it in place. As the canvas curled on itself, white paint fell to the ground like a dusting of snow. In the lightless room, white, blue, and yellow flew about. Shattered and torn, powerless and broken, they melted one by one into the darkness. Unable to think, unable to act, I endured the night. The time came for me to wake up, acting on pure reflexive habit. I stood up on unsteady feet and made my preparations. Pathetically enough, there was still a part of me holding on to hope. The house was no longer a refuge, but I began to make myself a place at school. I could just make more friends, find people to talk to. Maybe that would be enough. Maybe that would be something. Ida-san might be willing. If I kept talking to her little by little, she might become my friend. Or so she says. And then, Ida-san seemed to be talking to somebody. I peered in through the window. She was sitting at the very center of a group of girls. I talked to her later, just when she was alone. Sakaki-san's the child of a mistress. Or that's what Dad. The child of a mistress. Those were the same hateful words they printed in the magazine that changed everything. I think I'll keep being kind to her for the moment. Isn't that all the more reason to ignore her? This way I might get her to tell me some fun stories, right? Like how her mother wormed her way into the Sakaki house? Or maybe, for some reason, I thought of fruit hanging from a tree. At first it ripens and swells on the end of its branch, beautiful and tempting, but in the end its coloration grows impure and unattractive. Its point of connection to the tree begins to creep from the strain. On one thread of fiber snaps, then another. The thin line holding it to life and nourishment grows thinner and thinner. And finally, this moment, I heard something fall. I entered the classroom. The girls had been snickering about me until a moment before innocently looked away and moved on to another topic of conversation. A few moments after dropping my bag by my desk, I slowly began to walk in their direction. I felt every movement of my feet with a brilliant, eerie clarity. This might be what it's like to take the last few steps towards the summit of a high mountain. A climber is the thrill of achieving something, but in the determination, the clear-minded acceptance of fate. There might be something similar, so I thought, a spectator to my own actions. Do you need something? I had already decided what would happen next. Familiar feelings swelled inside me, the same as when I'd cut my hair, my diary, my canvas. Okay, I'm guessing maybe this is like the reason she got sent to the academy. I'm guessing this was like where like everyone decided she needed to get sent to Mahama Academy. So I'm guessing she physically assaults her classmate. What's wrong, Sakagi-san? Your face is very pale. Should we call? Ida Kanako's hand reached out to me. To my eyes, it looked like the grasping claw of a corpse pulling me down into hell. I understood all along. I simply kept myself from noticing there was never any place of refuge here. Forced myself and then found another way to live. Stab, stab, stab! Stab, stabby, stab! Right? I watched serenely as the blood spurted out. Wait, she stabbed who? Herself or her classmates? I'm gonna guess the classmate. What? For a moment, she couldn't even process what had happened. For just a moment, she stared down blankly at her hand, and her palm dyed in red. Ida Kanako collapsed in slow motion. Desks clouded all around. The others backed away as if distancing themselves from a live bomb. Sakaki-san? What are you doing? A teacher! Somebody call a teacher! That's right, I should have cut it all apart. I should have just shut off my brain and cut my way to freedom. I was grinding my teeth as hard as I could. There were tears streaming down my face. But all things considered, I didn't feel particularly sad. Much the opposite. Since the blade had finally severed me from the lies, I was filled with a strange sense of relief. It felt as though a wide shining road forward had been revealed to me. Of course it would come to this. I shouldn't have hoped for a happy ending in the first place. Everything was scripted from the very start. And the actress had passively accepted her role, dreaming of a heartwarming conclusion to the black comedy that had been written for her. At some point I began to laugh. The tears were still rolling down my cheeks, but there was no sadness in me anymore. I left most of that behind on the day my mother broke, and the rest on the day my father betrayed me. I depleted my stock of sorrow. Just how much of a clown do I need to be? Just how pathetic do I need to become? Yumiko, you're scaring me. What do I need to do to satisfy my cowering audience, to please the god who wrote this play? Their eyes watched me from what felt like an enormous distance, pushing me lower and lower into the dirt. It's hilarious, isn't it? I brandished the open box cutter in my right hand towards the back of the classroom. Incoherent little shrieks from my classmates were the only response. A few girls had already broken down in tears. Go ahead, everyone. Laugh. You've always been watching this farce, haven't you? Well, here's the punchline. Why aren't you laughing? I laughed in their place. Even when the teachers who came running pinned me down. Even when they carried me out of the classroom like some sort of terrorist. Wouldn't it be odder not to laugh at something so utterly ridiculous? When they took me away, I noticed my desk standing isolated in the chaos, and felt the twinge of pity at leaving it behind. Until the very end, I could never see the person who supposedly sat there. My father acted swiftly once he was notified. The incident was erased without so much as a disciplinary hearing. And I'm guessing, like, not too long after, like, I'm guessing that incident, like, caused her to get transferred to, like, another school, that being Mahama Academy. I know, like, Sachi, like, Well, Sachi, like, I don't think she, like, directly hurt anyone. She just destroyed an entire school. Like, almost, like, AGK style. Well, actually, no, like, in the Angry German Kid parodies, he blew up his school, and, well... Then again, like, Sachi was tricked into doing that to Mahama as well, so... We did get, like, an AGK style, like, school, like, getting blown up. Except that wasn't played for laughs, that wasn't supposed to be funny. After more than a month of that siege, I was half forced out, loaded unceremoniously into a car and brought to a town where the air smelled of salt water. I understood what sort of place it was the moment I saw the high wall surrounding it. It was a housing facility, a pleasant little cage where I could safely be stowed away without the risk of causing further trouble. A woman who introduced herself as the principal introduced me to the school with a slightly fearful expression on her face. She brought me to an empty dormitory and told me it would be my new home. When I checked the bank book I'd been handed on the way over, I found a rather excessive amount of pocket money in my account. From the day I began to wear an exceptionally flashy uniform and commute to Mahama Academy, I haven't been face to face with my father even once. A personality starts off as something like a cube. When we're young, we clumsily bump our corners against each other people in the form of childish conflicts. Eventually, our sharp edges are worn away to leave something more like a sphere. That's more or less what people are describing when they say someone softened. Moderate collisions with others help us mature. When those first impacts are too strong, they can have a different effect. Instead of losing our corners little by little, we splinter in strange, harsh ways, warping into crooked shapes. Once crooked, it's hard to become a sphere. Even as the people around them mellow, their sharpness only grows harsher, and everyone who approaches ends up getting hurt. But even the most warped human beings started off the same shape as everyone else. Sometimes they look back on the past and grieve. Sometimes I wonder if it's not too late to reshape themselves. Because they know it's an empty dream, they grieve once again. Sakaki Yumiko was one of many such sad, distorted objects. The rain which I'd taken for a passing shower continued long after the thunder passed away. By the time we leave our cover in the lingering drizzle, the sun's already set. In a change from the usual routine, I hurry down the road home with an arm wrapped around Sakaki, who stumbles along unsteadily at my side. I don't think I'm gonna fucking be able to get that Yumiko sick, twisted, crazy laugh from Yumiko out of my head. Like, I was honestly not ready for Yumiko to start laughing like a psycho. Why aren't you laughing? As she literally just stabs someone right in the head. Like, you fucking stabbed me in the head! Why would I be laughing? Rain never did let up, unfortunately. The rain's very weak by now, but the constant dampness has left her body noticeably chilled. And at that moment, her emotional state is a bit of a concern as well. I lean closely over Sakaki as we walk, sheltering her from the rain as best I can. That relatively brief journey back to the dorm feels awfully long right now. Oh, Amane, long time no see. You guys were gone for. Sakagi-san, what's wrong? Did you get hurt or something? Was it that much of a shock to see me holding Sakaki by the shoulder? Considering it's the girl's normal personality, I suppose it's only reasonable to jump straight to assuming something's physically wrong with her. We got caught in that downpour, that's all. We sheltered from the rain for a while. Ended up getting soaked anyway, huh? Are you alright, Sakaki-san? Sorry for making you worry. That uncharacteristic weakness from before is still plainly evident in her tone of voice. It must be pretty cold, right? I'll get something warm to drink if you want. Thank you. Yes, I'll take you up on that. Roger, usually you get Sakaki-san back to your room, okay? I'll bring it up when it's ready. Appreciate it. No big deal. Come on, we gotta move on already. I'm making a note. Once I'm old and gray, I'm going to write Amane was like a mother to us all in my memoirs. If that's an attempt at showing gratitude, try writing something that doesn't age me 20 years. Or 30 or 40, better yet. As soon as I got Sakaki to her room, she collapsed into her bed. Normally she would have ejected me to change out of her wet clothes, but she's currently lacking the energy to bother. Sakaki-san really was worn out, wasn't she? She's already asleep. Yeah. The hot orange and honey drink Amani provided seemed to calm her down. It didn't take long at all for her to nod off. I think she's got a slight fever as well. We were out in the rain and all. Yeah, she does feel a little hot. Lightly holding her hand at Sakaki's forehead, Amane nods in agreement. Sakaki doesn't seem to be in any real discomfort, but I can tell that she's breathing a little roughly. In any case, thanks for the help, Amane. I'm going to keep an eye on her for a little longer, but you can head back to your room. Oh, sure. Amane's response seems oddly hesitant. What's wrong? Yuji? I think you probably know better, but don't do her, okay? Yuji fucking does everybody, doesn't he? Well, Amane, like, apparently several times. No, then again, I think I vaguely remember seeing something about, like, a sex scene with Amane in the valley. So that couldn't have been with Yuji, because Yuji wasn't down in the valley with her. Yeah, there's apparently one with her and Kazuki. Well, assuming you're playing, like, the 18+ version, which I don't have. I have, like, the Steam version, which is, like, 17+, so not really, like, that much more accessible. I mean, you can be you have to be 17, like, apparently, to play Fruit of Grisaia. Except for, like, the few H scenes where you gotta just be, like, literally only 1 extra year older. Yuji fucking does everybody. So no point telling Yuji not to do Yumiko. He does everyone. I once saw a list on the r/Grisaia, the Fruit of Grisaia subreddit, a list of all of the people Yuji has fucked. Most of it being, like, non-canon, though. For some reason, Amane's basketball team was on that list. As in the basketball team that shouldn't be alive anymore because they all died in the valley after trying to eat each other. So yeah, that can't be canon, like... like, they would all, like, really, like, be dead by the time, like, he would have met Amane or anyone else. So, like... yeah, like, I assume given his, like, backstory, he never would have, like, ended up meeting any of those people. And apparently there was also one where he is having sex with Makina's mother. Well, of course, he also has sex with Makina, that I know, too. And yes, Makina's mother. And safe to say, in that scene, I hope he goes really hard and aggressive on her and just makes her suffer, because of what Makina's mom did to her daughter. Like, yeah, I definitely want to see the bitch suffer. Yeah, so, like, I know he did... I think I maybe saw, like, a few screenshots of a sex scene with Michiru, also. I know Makina for sure. Like, I actually watched those two already, so those I'm aware of. Amane, I'm pretty damn sure, like, he screws her at least once. Yumiko, I'm pretty sure he does also. I think I saw, like, that too. A screenshot of that too. Sachi? Yeah, probably also her as well. JB, his, like, boss at work. Like, I saw, like, all these thumbnails on X videos, so... I'm well aware that Yuji is just getting mad pussy. Maybe you just seize the moment and dip your wick, and then there'd be all kinds of trouble, and can't have you catching her cold, right? I don't know, I think I'd be, like, a little more concerned about just catching a cold when having sex. My face falls on my palm. Find myself recalling a gag brain graph website Sachi showed me once. Just by entering someone's name, you get a brain-shaped pie chart, breaking down a composition of our thoughts. Hers would be divided in half right down the middle. One side would be folky grandma wisdom, the other would be branded with the word sex. You think I'm gonna start making babies like a rabbit the moment someone leaves me in a cage with a female? Does this scenario play out frequently inside that filthy mind of yours? I'm trying to just warn you before things get out of hand. You know where I'm coming from here, right? Not a bad idea, come to think of it. What are you talking about? Slight fever can actually make for a more enjoyable experience in some respects. What? Alright then, might as well put that to the test. I'm not, like... It's not like you can catch a fever intentionally, I'm curious. I'm sure Sakaki will understand. A little experimentation like this can only enrich your life, right? She might end up thanking me for expanding her horizons. The thought Hasn't even occurred to me, but thanks to a tip from my sexually savvy friend Amane, a new world of possibility awaits. Life is always overflowing with chances to explore the wonders of the unknown. Thank you, Amane. She literally doesn't fucking know what to say. I love it. Amane? Is Amane broken? Stares back at me with the blank eyes of a broken electronic toy. Smiling brightly, give her a friendly thump on the shoulder. It was a joke. It damn well better be a total idiot! Amane's karate chop lands a critical hit smack in the middle of my weary head. From outside, an owl hoots in mournful commiseration. I'm gonna go back now, but seriously, no funny business. You gotta let her rest. I said I understand, didn't I? I have a hard time trusting you. Best consider the possibility she might try some half-assed wiretapping outside the door. Shaking my head, I return to Sakaki's side. Her breath's coming regularly, a little more quietly than before. She doesn't seem to have noticed the commotion in the slightest. That's definitely for the best. Then look over at closer range. Come to think of it, this is the first time I've seen her sleeping. The girl really does have a pretty face. She's constantly forcing into a scowl, so it's not easy to notice, but Sakaki Yumiko is definitely what you call a beauty. Right now that face is relaxed, her eyes shut, her cheeks slightly flushed. Sakaki looks very calm and peaceful at the moment, but much of her life has been an emotional roller coaster of loneliness, hope, and anger. Now that I know the whole story, your usual prickly attitude is all too understandable. Rest easy, alright? I'll protect you. Then something about a warm towel. So we've been live for how long now? Intruders. Definitely hyped to see what the next chapter is going to be about. But we've been live for fucking 2 hours already. Definitely longer than I was planning this Grisaia stream to be, so I'm definitely going to just cut it off here for now. Still, fuck me sideways that backstory though. If only she would have been a boy. Fuck me sideways that backstory though. That shit's fucked. Yeah, that's just brutal. No wonder she fucking stabbed her classmate in the hand. No wonder it like got to that point. She was basically just keeping it all in and then just couldn't take it anymore, and the next thing you know, like, just we got like basically like, who's a guy that likes stabbing people? I don't know, just name me a guy that likes stabbing people, because nothing's coming to mind at the moment. I don't know, Freddy from Nightmare on Elm Street? Freddy Krueger, if that's where he's from? Or does he not stab people, or does he do other things than stab people? I was thinking maybe Kurumi from Data Life for a second. But no, like, she, like, shoots people. Doesn't stab them. I don't know. I'm just gonna end the stream here. I think I saw, like, at least, like, one other anime girl, like, I think I've seen, like, picture of this crazy pink-haired girl with, like, I think 2 twin tails. This crazy smile on her face and always holding a knife. Do you know or something? Grisaia. I have no clue what anime she's from. I typically see her just, like, smiling like a lunatic, holding a knife covered in blood. Protagonist of the anime manga series Future Diary. Crimes, stalking, mass destruction. Yeah, I think I've seen these pictures of this cute anime girl who just looks like she wants to kill the next person she sees. Kind of thinking of that, but I've never heard of this series. Oh yeah, cute girl smiling at you, holding an axe behind her back like she wants to just chop your head off with it. Ah, yes. definitely the girl of all time.